Hey everyone, it's Crystal here. So I'm here to talk further about burnout today and who it can affect and the different sectors or environments or groups of people that do experience burnout to a higher degree. And the reason why I want to focus on just bringing some attention to these different professions is because there's all these groups out there now where there's a support for this kind of burnout situation or this sector of people. But just be aware that burnout can happen to everyone. It doesn't matter what environment you're in, it doesn't matter what your profession is, it doesn't matter what your home life is, it doesn't matter really any other factor except for your own self and how you deal with stress. So it really can affect all of us, and none of us are out of the weeds when it comes to potentially going down the path of burnout. And it's how we are dealing with stress. And as stress piles on, especially this day and age, where there's so many external factors outside of just our home life, our work life, our own life. There's just so many factors all over the place that add another layer of stress and compound the stress and keep adding more. And so when we're constantly adding more stress and we're not dealing with it in a very useful or productive way, and we're stressing out about it and we're not having really positive thoughts, and it creates this dialogue in our head of just complete frustration and confusion and potentially anger. It really sets us up to then start snowballing into chronic stress, where then it leads to even further problems. And the problems are things like it could start from minor issues, which we've talked about in other videos, and I'll link it in the end of this so you can see that. But it starts off with some minor things. Perhaps you're just dealing with some anxiety, and maybe you're just having a hard time sleeping, or maybe you're just confused and having a hard time getting motivated. And it starts maybe in some smaller symptoms, and then it starts snowballing into some more critical things. So this could be like major insomnia. Maybe you're having issues with digestion. Perhaps maybe it goes to the point where you start having issues with your nervous system, and you're sweating all the time, or you have tension all the time, or maybe you're always anxious and you're at that high fight and flight mode all the time, and so your body's always in that heightened sensory mode. Or maybe you're just feeling stressed, so you get all the headaches and migraines and autoimmune diseases. And I mean, the list can go on. There's just so many things that occur with us and to us when we are so stressed out and we just can't deal with it. So, this is to bring some further awareness specifically to the caregivers in the world, my caregivers who are out there taking care of the elderly, taking care of their loved ones, taking care of their children, taking care of anyone who needs that extra level of attention and care. And the reason why caregivers have a tendency to burn out is because they give so much of themselves. It requires so much of them to meet the demands of another person. And let's be honest, have you not felt that once in your life where you had somebody in your life and you had to meet their expectations or their needs? And maybe not to the same level as a caregiver who that person fully relies on them, or there's a lot of involvement with this person in their life in order to provide support and for them to be able to be functional in their life. But you've been there where you've had to take care of someone or something, or even an animal, and you realize how much effort, how much thinking, how much time, how much dedication is required of you. And if you don't do it maybe for one day, you're kind of lost and you need to pick up the pieces the next day. And so with caregivers, it's just a constant rolling ball where they are always giving and giving and really sometimes unfortunately forget to take care of themselves. So when we can't take care of ourselves, why do we expect to take care of other people in such a great way, giving them value, giving them positivity towards their life, if we can't meet those needs for ourselves? And so caregivers almost overextend themselves. They really give more than receive. And everything in life is about giving and receiving. It's like breathing. You have to inhale to exhale. So, knowing that, there has to be a balance where it works in tandem. And for caregivers, a lot of issues that cause them burnout can range from emotional demands, resulting in the care receiver to not gain what they need for the conditions that they're in. So maybe they're demanding a lot from their caregiver emotionally. So meeting their emotional needs, supporting them, keeping them company, listening to them, meeting their needs emotionally. Maybe they're happy or sad or need to vent or need to, you know, just let it out. And so really, a caregiver is kind of like a therapist, a counselor, where they're listening to the caree carry on about what's going on, how they feel, what they need emotionally, and then the caregiver trying to meet those needs. And sometimes the mark keeps moving and they keep meeting, but there's always another one and another one. And so it does get very exhausting for caregivers who can't seem to keep up with that moving needle. And it really is challenging sometimes for them to really meet the emotional needs of the caree, especially when there's a lot of demands, and especially if you're the caregiver and you don't know how to say no, you don't know how to create boundaries, healthy boundaries, you don't know how to maybe maneuver emotionally with other people because you're more of a people pleaser. So this can really drain a caregiver, the emotional needs of another person. And emotional does take a lot of energy. I mean, all of our emotions are in a form of energy. So when you keep needing to put out that energy to meet that emotion, you're exhausting yourself if it's not going to be in a positive or a good way in your mind. If you're dragging your feet or feeling really irritated or annoyed, that can really bring a lot of negativity to meet that emotional need of that person, which then brings you down. So it's really how we're responding to the emotional demand. It's really how you interact with it rather than taking the mind frame where you're irritated and annoyed. Be like, okay, what does this person really need? Take a minute to just evaluate, what is this person really asking for? Can you meet their need at this time? And if you can't, then say so. It's about creating that healthy boundary and system for yourself to sometimes not need to overextend yourself and people please. Another thing that makes caregivers burnout a whole lot easier is conflicting demands. Maybe you have a role and you're just doing all these other things too in the mix. Or maybe you started off doing one thing and now as things have progressed, you're needing to do more and more and more. And it's just asking more of you. And so when there's no outline, no guideline, and I know this is like a job where we need to have it written down and this is what my duties are, my responsibilities, what is required of me. Then you don't overextend yourself and do a whole lot more that's just not part of what you signed up for. And yes, this can constantly evolve and change based on the needs, But when it's overwhelming and it's getting too much and it's exhausting you, these kinds of things aren't going to be able to allow you to do any of them very well. You may not even do the things that you originally set out to do very well because you're multitasking and doing all these other things as well. And let me be real with you, multitasking doesn't work. If anyone writes multitasking on their resume, the first thing that comes to my mind is you don't know how to focus, because our minds can't move all these different directions and do it really well. I mean, I used to think multitasking was such a great thing. Okay, I'll do this, and then I'll do this while that's happening, and then when that's happening, I'm going to also do this, and then it all turns into a giant mess. And actually, I'm more exhausted and overwhelmed, and actually don't put out quality. It suffers when you multitask. So if anyone ever tells you multitasking is part of a requirement or a job, let them know that clearly they're not looking for quality, just quantity, just output. And so I really do think that focusing on what your strengths are, what you're good at. Maybe if you need to administer medication and you really feel confident and you enjoy doing it and you don't mind doing it, stick with that. But maybe if it's like changing them or bathing them or helping them do that stuff, maybe you need to find a personal support worker to come help do these things. Find some external resources to take away the things that you can't deal with personally, and find some resources out there that really know how to do this in a professional, in a humane, dignified way. And that's what your job is as a caregiver, is allowing that person or that child or whomever to still live with dignity, to still have that. And so we really need to be mindful of how we can provide that, but where our limits are. And again, goes back to boundaries, which I know that term gets thrown around a lot. You have to set your boundaries, you got to know your boundaries. What are your boundaries? But most people don't hold them. Most people put them there and then they let people cross them, or they cross them themselves, and they don't really work. It is a work in progress. It is something you have to practice, get comfortable with saying, get comfortable with enforcing. Just overall know that your self-worth matters more. So if that matters so much, then so do your boundaries. Just my little spiel on boundaries, because I feel like it's such a common concept that everybody says, oh yeah, establish your boundaries. Oh yeah, these are my boundaries, but nobody, absolutely no one follows them. So they are important, but only if you enforce them and follow them yourself. Some other things that cause caregiver burnout is ambiguity of roles. So if you don't know what your role is, maybe you're a doctor this day, maybe you're a chef after that, maybe you're the housekeeper then, maybe you're the exerciser, the trainer after. You're doing all these roles. And really your role is, maybe it's your parent and you're just the daughter or son, and really you can only help out in this capacity in a daughter and son loving way. Well, if that's the case, then find some external resources. Maybe you're really not good at administering medication. Maybe you don't feel comfortable. Get somebody in that is a professional that can do that, set up a schedule. Maybe it's a neighbor who even feels comfortable doing it. You know, there's other resources out there in community if you do search for it. It doesn't always have to be a paid resource. I always like to get to know my neighbors. Neighbors help neighbors. That's the point of the word neighbor. It's your neighbor next door that is there for you, watches out for you. You know, they kind of have their eye out, you know, neighborhood watch, what they used to say all the time, because everybody's kind of watching and keeping an eye out for each other. Like, where's that? Where's that these days? I just feel like everybody has little strengths all around. And if we all combine those together, you can find some really great resources around that can help you. And so I really encourage getting involved with community, really getting to know people and create that community connection again. I feel like with technology and everything that's gone around, it's really created that degree of separation where we don't have that physical connection anymore. That social connection has been kind of stripped away or stifled. And so this could be a way to rebuild that and really get to know people around you. There are some incredible people all around. Yeah, of course, there's a few rose thorn bushes out there, but like those are the ones that you just don't bother with. You just smell the rose, don't touch the thorns, don't get too close. But there's always somebody out there that can help. And so figure out what your role is, define that. And yeah, it's weird, write it down, but when we write things down, it creates a concrete thought, something that we can refer back to and look at. And when you write it out of your head, when it's stuck in here, it's constantly gets suppressed, or maybe you forget, or maybe it just doesn't really resonate. But once it's on paper, it becomes like concrete. Like you can't change that unless you white it out, of course. But most importantly, you can't change that. It's on paper and you've gotten that out of your head. So it just makes it more legitimate.